Quick warning, there will be spoilers for not only Gates to Infinity, but also the Rescue Team and Explorers games, so if you'd rather have just like a quick 2-minute summary without any spoilers, you can skip to the timestamp shown. Otherwise, with that out of the way, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity has officially been out for 10 years, so I wanted to do something for the occasion. I feel this one isn't too well appreciated compared to the rest of the series, and well, to each their own, but I want to talk about why I personally like it quite a bit. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have time to revisit it recently, so I just had to write down what came to mind when I thought back on the game and not try to go into super fine detail on everything. But anyway, a good place to start is probably with the simple fact that Gates to Infinity is kind of different, and I like that it's different. If you compare it to the previous games in the series, it kind of has its own identity. It's the first one in the series, well, it's the first one outside of Japan to go with 3D character models instead of 2D sprites. And as charming as the old sprites were, it is kind of neat to see what kind of set pieces they can animate for certain story scenes now in 3D. And they were smart about it, and they kept the face portraits for dialogue windows, so they didn't lose out on any of the expressiveness either. Another difference with this one is a change in composers, though I feel I should clear the air about something here, and I will really try not to butcher these names. Now, a lot of people seem to credit Arata Iyoshi exclusively as the composer for the music of the first two games, and then, he's not involved in Gates to Infinity. I myself have been guilty of that before this video too. But there were other composers involved. In fact, every game has had different composers. So, credit where it's due, I don't have details on hand about who composed what tracks or anything, but the music of Red and Blue Rescue Team was composed by Arata Iyoshi and Atsuhiro Ishizuna, while the music of Explorers of Time, Darkness, and Sky was composed by Arata Iyoshi, Hideki Sakamoto, Keisuke Ito, Ryoma Nakamura, and Kenichi Saito. The music of Gates to Infinity was composed by Keisuke Ito and Yasuhiro Kawagoe. And I will reiterate that Keisuke Ito was also involved in Explorers, so yeah, one of the Explorers composers was actually involved in Gates to Infinity, it just wasn't Arata Iyoshi. So yeah, the more you know. Anyway, the music of Gates to Infinity does have a slightly different feel to it sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's bad. The first two games just kind of set the bar high for a lot of people. But Gates to Infinity isn't without its own good tracks too. Let me highlight this track here from an endgame dungeon, which to me, this one really carries that weight of how serious the situation is. The fact that everything is going to end if you can't stop what's going on. Then there's this track from the last stretch of the final dungeon, and I really like how multifaceted this one is. Like the way it switches its tone up a bit throughout instead of only conveying one emotion the entire time. Like it started out with a bit of this kind of sense of wonder that fits with how beautiful the icy landscape is that you're traversing. And then it goes into this triumphant, inspiring mood that fits with the adventure and the fact that you're closing in on your goal. But then later on, it also has this slow, somber bit to remind you how serious the situation still is, even if your goal is within sight. It's really cool stuff. Then there's the music for the last battle, which carries a bit of epicness, while also playing off of the previous story scene and just feeling full of hope. And it's not like it's only the endgame stuff that sounds good. Heck, I really like the tutorial dungeon music, for instance. So yeah, even though the previous games set the bar kinda high, I think there's plenty here that's worth appreciating too. But now let's get to the real meat of this video and talk about the story. When it came to the first game in the series, I want to point out how the emphasis was always, from the get-go, placed on the rise in natural disasters and the danger that poses to the world and everyone in it, and the mystery of your self-insert character's lost memories. Similar case with the second game, emphasis right away on your self-insert character's lost memories and a strange ability that they possess, and then soon enough a threat to the world comes into focus. For a bit at the start, Gates to Infinity kinda does things differently. It does give you a hook at the start, showing you a vision of someone who says they need your help, and then they're shown to be in great danger, but then it just kinda drops you into the world, quite literally in fact, and that's it for a while. There's no big approaching calamity that you know of at the time, no looming world-ending threat, again, that you know of. So instead, for a little while at the start, you're given a story that is much more focused on its characters. Without the presence of a life-threatening crisis, the early story arcs are free to be more personal within their smaller scale. Like, take the very first arc that you have, where you get scammed by this criminal who did what they did because they've been scammed, and they've lost all faith in their own ability for, like, their work and passion after suffering an injury that made it hard for them to do what they did properly. You know, they couldn't do the same job they could before, and they just feel like it's not worth it anymore, like, they can't pull it off, and they think this is just how they have to do things now, by like, cheating other people out of their money. But you talk them down from their despair at themselves and their resentment of the world and convince them to give their passion another chance. I love that they got to tell a story like that early on in the game, and it's also a great opener for the overarching theme of bringing people together. Another different thing I like a lot is the partner character in this game. As endearing as the first game's partner characters could be, I feel that the one in Gates to Infinity has a lot more like self-confidence and a lot more agency. It doesn't feel like their plans suddenly changed or only became possible for them just because you came along at that moment, although you certainly do help. On that note, I would say in general, your self-insert character has a lot less of that, like, always the most important character in the room thing going on compared to the first two games, which is a welcome change of pace in my book. Like, you still have a uniquely important role within the story, but I just can't help feeling like more of the other characters were also allowed to be more important this time around. Your character isn't even the only human brought over from another world to save this one. Granted, you only ever hear about the existence of the others, but I thought that was a really cool twist on the formula that these games had been using for their premise up to this point. I'm surprised I've never heard of anyone writing a fanfic from the perspective of, like, the other human-turned-Pokemon characters in this game and the adventures they went on before they got wrecked off screen. Then again, it's not like I ever really looked, so maybe someone has done that, who knows. Anyway, let's talk main antagonist. In a certain sense, and you might disagree with this, but there's a way I feel you could kind of say that there isn't a main antagonist, at least not one who's, like, responsible for everything. That's something that the previous games also, like, attempted to different degrees, and it's something that I think was kind of a cool, unique thing about these games' stories. To go over how the first game did it, you do, of course, clash with some characters in that game, but the closest thing to an antagonist isn't really like some evil adversary. It's more like a dumb kid who just wants to be some big shot, and they're willing to throw you under the bus when you get in their way. They even have a change of heart later on and save your butt, and to begin with, they have no connection whatsoever to the world-threatening calamity. The true threat in that game isn't even something sentient. It's just a literal force of nature. The final boss in that game ends up being really awkwardly shoehorned in because they kind of just they had to have a final boss, so here's a fight, basically. The second game arguably did have a more concrete antagonist toward the end, but still, in proper context, it's worth pointing out that they're not like the cause of the problems in the game. They are a symptom of the problem. The scary antagonists exist because of the calamity and not the other way around. In the main game, if you play the post-game of Explorers, they kind of backpedal on that unique villain dynamic and introduce a new character who's like, "Ooh, I'm the one that caused the calamity, and now I'm going to be rid of you and your meddling, ooh." They're kind of generic and probably the weakest part of the narrative, but generic is okay once in a while, and I will say that little arc had a couple really like cool moments, and I won't deny that it is kind of cool to have that showdown with the villain at the end. Like, I don't really hate them at their inclusion. It's just that when I really look at it with like a critical lens, I think that they had something more unique going on when there was no like true villain who was responsible for everything. But yeah, so and on that kind of dynamic where like you don't have a villain who is responsible for the problems of the game's plot, Gates to Infinity, in my opinion, handles that the best out of the three. The calamity in Gates to Infinity has a form that can be fought so that you have a final boss that doesn't just feel shoehorned in, but it isn't technically like a sentient being per se. It's kind of effectively a force of nature in a sense that will end the world if left unchecked. You do have some adversaries who attempt to stop you from saving the world, but they have nothing to do with why that force of nature exists. They just feel that the world is so far gone that they should everyone should let nature take its course. It would be better if the world ended and could be reborn from a blank slate. That's kind of where they're coming from. So, they didn't cause the problem. They're just getting in your way when it comes to trying to stop the problem. And that segues nicely into talking about this game's thematics. When you dig into it, it's a deceptively bleak setting. The world of Gates to Infinity is basically one that is half drowning in misery, surviving, but hardly thriving. There's practically no trust between anyone. Many are always on edge and a little too ready for a fight at a moment's notice. Most choose to act in their own self-interest above all else. The shady types willing to take advantage of others are prospering while the remaining honest ones suffer. Then in comes your partner character with his big dream of bringing some Pokemon together to make a true paradise, and when you arrive, you start to help with making that dream happen. Together, the two of you make some new friends, and you help them learn to trust others or to be better themselves, to open up after having shut themselves away, to once again face this world that they had begun to turn their back on. Then, at the end of the game, the world-threatening calamity you face is actually the despair of the world itself. Everyone's misery and hopelessness had begun to manifest physically into this thing that would come to end their suffering and the whole world along with it. Merely being in close proximity to this thing proves to be suffocating, literally. After making it all that way, your characters aren't even able to stand, much less fight against it. But then you hear the voices of everyone you had met, everyone you helped to regain their hope in the world. They're all cheering you on, and their positive emotions end up having a damping effect on the power of despair. So with everyone's help, you're able to stand up and fight until the calamity is no more. And yes, it's a very the power of friendship kind of moment, but it's the way it's framed. This isn't like, the power of friendship helps me punch a god really, really hard. This is like, the power of friendship helps us overcome our despair and hopelessness. And that's actually pretty real if you think about it. I'll be honest, this story resonated a lot with me in 2013, and it only resonates with me more in 2023. In an exaggerated, cartoonish sort of way, I feel like it holds a mirror up to our own world, while also telling us that we can make a positive difference in it all. Thematically, I see Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity as a story about helping people and giving them a chance to be better, about coming together to face a world that can, at times, be cruel and uncaring, to inspire hope in each other in the face of overwhelming hopelessness, and change the future into a better one. A perfect paradise may not be possible in our reality, but the world can be made much better when people are brought closer together. The fact is, the misery born from division and isolation, from fear and distrust, always assuming the worst intentions, always looking around every corner for the next person who might wrong you. Those things will lead everyone toward a grim future, but we all have the power to change it, even if only a little bit at a time. And sure, not everyone's ways can be changed. Even in the game, at least a couple of characters just get chased off rather than coming around to everyone's side. There will always be those who care only about themselves, or those who desire nothing more than to be above others and look down on everyone else, or those who actually find joy in causing others pain. All those types of people, and more, will often cause problems for everyone else. But sometimes you might be surprised who can turn around and be better when given a proper chance. People are often complicated. They aren't always what they seem at first glance. Just, it can do a lot of harm when too many people are too quick to condemn, when retribution is always more important than rehabilitation. It's not an easy balance. You can't just let yourself or others be taken advantage of or be beaten down for someone else's amusement. But at the same time, you should never underestimate the power of simply being kind, and the ripple effect that can have throughout someone's life and the lives of those around them. And if, at the end of it all, enough people can be brought together, you can overcome almost anything together. That is why I love Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity.